Sarah Dawson adjusted the second-hand blazer, hanging awkwardly on her slim shoulders. Her shoes, polished but worn at the edges, squeaked slightly against the marbled floor as she entered the towering glass doors of Neurocore Corporation. Inside, the reception hall smelled of fresh flowers, leather portfolios and expensive cologne, a place that screamed exclusivity and perfection. Sarah, with her plain brown handbag and tired smile, already felt out of place. The receptionist, Rachel Collins, a woman with hair so sharp it could slice paper, barely hid her disdain. "Name?" she asked, her manicured fingers pausing over the tablet. "Sarah Dawson," Sarah replied, steadying her nerves. Rachel's eyes swept over her simple outfit and worn shoes, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "You're here for the executive assistant interview?" "Yes." Rachel simply nodded toward the waiting area. Sarah could feel the stares from the other candidates, sleek women with sleek resumes in sleek suits, as she took a seat. On the far side, Jason Reed, head of finance, sipped espresso and muttered under his breath to Brandon Meyer, a young executive famous only because his father owned a chunk of the company. "Maybe she's here to clean the windows," Jason joked. Brandon chuckled, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah pretended not to notice. She smoothed her skirt, clasped her hands, and whispered quietly, "You don't belong here, but you didn't. Come this far to leave now." Moments later, the conference room door opened. Emily Wong, head of data strategy, emerged, holding a clipboard. Her eyes paused on Sarah for a millisecond longer than necessary. Beside her, Mark Scott, operations manager, raised an eyebrow in silent judgment. "Next," Emily announced, without calling any name. Sarah stood up. A ripple of snickering travelled among the other candidates. As Sarah stepped inside the room, she was met with the blinding white of a glass table, a dozen silver laptops, and 5 executives who looked like they had walked out of a fashion magazine shoot. At the head of the table sat Brandon Meyer, twirling a pen lazily, legs crossed arrogantly. Jason leaned forward first. "Sarah, is it? Tell us, what makes you think you can assist someone operating at this level?" Sarah smiled, simple and sincere. "Because I know how to work hard, think on my feet, and I don't give up when things get messy." Jason and Brandon exchanged a mocking glance. "Messy?" Brandon scoffed. "You certainly dressed for the theme." Laughter, polite but cruel, filled the room. Sarah felt her cheeks burn but held her ground. Emily chimed in with a sugary voice. "And your resume. It says you were a store cashier, a part-time admin assistant, and a freelance coordinator. You do realise this position is highly demanding?" "I do," Sarah said softly but firmly. "I've managed chaos without fancy titles. Mark..." Scott leaned back, arms crossed. "Handling chaos in a grocery store isn't the same as handling billion-dollar accounts." "And," Jason added with fake sweetness, "appearance does matter. You represent the brand, after all." Sarah nodded. "Understood, but integrity and work ethic aren't worn on the outside." For a moment, there was silence, heavy, uncomfortable. Then Brandon chuckled and whispered just loud enough, "Maybe next time she'll borrow a Prada bag." Sarah's hand tightened around her resume. They threw technical questions at her, one after another. Sarah answered as best as she could, drawing from real experiences, not textbooks, but their minds were already made up. Her appearance spoke louder to them than her answers ever could. Still, Sarah didn't falter. She smiled when Brandon accidentally pushed a water jug toward the edge of the table. She quietly picked up her resume when Jason flicked it onto the floor with mock regret, and she stood tall when Emily said sweetly, "Perhaps you'd fit better in one of our support roles." Sarah gathered her soaked and crumpled papers, nodded politely and turned to leave. As she walked out, she heard someone, maybe Brandon, whisper, "Maybe she can mop up the place after." The laughter that followed was a sharp blade, slicing through her heart. Still, she kept her back straight and her head high as she exited the room, mud on her shoes, pride in her chest. Sarah Dawson barely made it to the hallway before she heard them. Behind the heavy glass door, muffled laughter erupted, the kind of laughter meant to crush, not to amuse. She paused for a moment, her hand tightening around her damp resume, trying to will herself invisible. Inside, Brandon Meyer said, loudly enough, was she even serious? I mean, did she think we were handing out charity today? Jason Reed snickered. She probably thought we'd give her a mop and bucket and say, congratulations, you're the new executive assistant. The others laughed, including Emily Wong, who flipped through Sarah's resume with exaggerated horror. She didn't even go to an Ivy League college. Community college. Can you imagine presenting her to a partner meeting? Maybe, Brandon smirked, if we want to lower expectations. Another burst of laughter. Sarah turned away, focusing on the exit, but before she could reach it, Rachel Collins's shrill voice rang out behind her. Miss Dawson, could you come back for just a moment? Sarah's stomach twisted, but she turned. Around, her expression composed. Inside the conference room again, the atmosphere had shifted. There was a predatory gleam in their eyes now, like a group of hyenas that smelled weakness. Jason leaned forward, fake sympathy dripping from his voice. Miss Dawson, we'd like you to complete a quick practical task, a problem-solving exercise. Sure, Sarah replied calmly, though her heart pounded. Emily slid a paper toward her across the table, a dense logic puzzle involving scheduling conflicts, fake employee rosters, and invented crises. We give all final candidates something like this, Emily lied smoothly. They didn't. You have 15 minutes, Mark Scott added, smiling thinly. And no use of the internet. Sarah nodded and sat down at the lone chair at the edge of the table. As soon as she picked up the pen, she could feel them watching, every stroke she made, every time she paused. She worked steadily, even when Jason accidentally dropped his stapler next to her feet with a loud clatter, making her jump. Brandon coughed loudly, whispering, Careful, Sarah, that's heavy machinery. More laughter. Sarah blocked them. Out, forced her mind to stay clear. She finished the logic exercise 2 minutes before the deadline and slid it back across the table with quiet confidence. Jason glanced at it, and without even pretending to read it properly, he smiled coldly. Then ripped the paper in half. A stunned silence fell. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Oh, whoops, Jason said, completely insincere. Butterfingers. Brandon Meyer stood up theatrically and walked to the water station in the corner of the room. He filled a paper cup halfway. Then, as he passed behind Sarah, he accidentally tipped it over her shoulder. The cold water soaked through the thin fabric of her blouse. Sarah flinched but said nothing. The panel laughed harder now, emboldened by her silence. Rachel Collins, still standing at the door, laughed so hard she wiped tears from her eyes. Maybe you should have brought a raincoat, sweetheart, she said between gasps. Sarah slowly rose to her feet, feeling the water drip down her arm. Her dignity, however, remained intact. She gathered the shredded test paper without a word. Careful, Emily called out sweetly. The janitor closet is 2 doors down the hall and not the executive suite. Mark chuckled and added, Don't forget your mop. Someone from the table snorted so loud that Sarah finally paused. She turned her gaze, not furious, not desperate, but calm, steady, almost sorrowful. And for a moment, the mockers felt a strange discomfort gnawing inside them. Before anyone could react, Brandon grabbed the nearby trash can and pushed it toward her feet. You can throw your resume in there too, he joked. Sarah looked at the trash, then at the people who thought themselves important because they wore tailored suits. She smiled. A real, genuine smile. The kind that said, You can't take from me what you never gave. Without a word, she bent down, picked up her soaked resume, folded it neatly, and placed it back into her bag. As she turned to leave, Jason called mockingly, Wait, someone call security. Make sure she doesn't steal the stapler. Another round of laughter. Mark Scott, unable to resist, threw a crumpled napkin at her back. It bounced off harmlessly. Sarah didn't flinch. She walked out the door, head held higher than ever. In the hallway, her steps were steady. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She made it to the elevators, pressed the button and waited. Behind the glass walls, she could still hear them laughing. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside, alone. As the doors slid shut, cutting, off the cruel noise, Sarah finally allowed herself a single deep, trembling breath. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost like a prayer, "They don't define me." The elevator ascended silently, and Sarah Dawson, soaked, humiliated but unbroken, rode upward toward a destiny none of them could imagine. The elevator door opened onto the reception floor, and Sarah Dawson stepped out, her blouse clinging coldly to her back, her resume soggy inside her worn handbag. But before she could even cross the lobby to leave, a sharp voice stopped her. Rachel Collins again, her lips curled into a fake smile. "Miss Dawson, please wait. The panel would like to complete the evaluation." Sarah turned around slowly. The lobby lights buzzed faintly above her. For a fleeting second, she thought of walking away, just pushing the heavy glass doors open and never looking back. But she didn't. She walked back across the lobby, every step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the panel members lounged like lazy kings surveying a failed jester. Jason Reed clapped his hands slowly as she re-entered. "She's got stamina," he said. "That's something." Brandon Meyer snickered. "Maybe we should give her a real challenge." Sarah stood by the door, silent, soaked but unbroken. Emily Wong's cold voice broke the brief silence. "We have a quick, practical demonstration." She gestured dramatically to the corner of the room where a mop bucket sat. "Since you're so good at cleaning up messes," she said sweetly, "why don't you show us how it's done?" Sarah blinked once, twice. The words sunk in like stones thrown into still water. Jason grabbed the mop and wheeled the bucket forward, water sloshing dangerously at the edges. "Come on," he said, tossing the mop at her feet. "Earn your keep." The others laughed openly now. Even Mark Scott, who had stayed silent until now, couldn't hide his grin. Sarah's hands remained loose at her sides. She didn't move. Brandon leaned back in his chair and said lazily, "Maybe she's shy. Poor thing. I bet she thought she was here for a real job." Laughter again, cutting, sharp, vicious. Rachel Collins appeared with a phone raised slightly, pretending to check messages but angling it clearly to record. A little entertainment for their executive chat groups. Sarah finally bent down, but not to pick up the mop. Instead, she calmly retrieved the shredded pieces of her resume, still damp from her bag, and began piecing them together on the glass table, smoothing each segment with deliberate, steady movements. The executives watched in confused silence. When she finished arranging the ruined paper as best as she could, Sarah finally looked up, directly at Jason Reed, Brandon Meyer, Emily Wong, and Mark Scott. Her voice was quiet, but the room fell utterly silent. "I didn't come here today because I thought I could impress you with designer clothes or Ivy League degrees," she said, her voice calm. "I came because I thought your company valued substance over surface." No one spoke. No one moved. Sarah picked up the mop gently, balanced it upright, and leaned it against Jason's chair without a word. She turned on her heel and walked out, slow, deliberate steps. Behind her, she heard Brandon whisper sharply, "Get security. Make sure she doesn't make a scene in the lobby," Jason added mockingly. "Or steal the mop. Looks like her most valuable skill today." By the time Sarah reached the glass doors, 2 security guards were approaching, confusion written across their faces. Rachel Collins hissed something to them, waving her hand dismissively at Sarah like she was nothing more than spilled coffee. One of the guards hesitated. "Miss, we've been asked to escort you out." Sarah looked at him, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. He didn't seem cruel, just following orders. She nodded once. "No need," she said quietly. "I'm already leaving." As she walked past the guards, she noticed, almost in slow motion, the stares of the well-dressed employees in the lobby, Some curious, some smug, some indifferent, but none kind. Sarah pushed open the heavy doors, stepped outside into the blinding sunlight, and only then did her shoulders slump, only then did her breath catch. Her wet clothes clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was tangled, her resume was ruined. And yet, somehow, she felt lighter, because now she knew exactly what kind of people she was walking away from. She crossed the courtyard without once looking back. Inside the gleaming upper floors of Neurocore Corporation, the air was buzzing, not with productivity but with gossip, receptionists whispered behind manicured hands. Assistants texted furiously under their desks. Everyone had seen it. The poor girl, soaked and humiliated, escorted out like a criminal. Did you see how Jason and Brandon threw her out? Someone said she cried in the elevator. Did you record it? Of course, it's already on the executive group chat. On the 45th floor, at the heart of the company, a man sat silently behind a vast glass desk. Ethan Dawson, founder and CEO of Neurocore, was reviewing quarterly reports, sharp-eyed, focused, until his personal assistant, a usually unshakable woman named Michelle, knocked hesitantly and entered the room. "Sir, there's something you should see," she said, her voice unusually tight. Ethan looked up, immediately alert. Michelle rarely lost her composure. She placed her tablet on his desk and pressed play. The security footage filled the screen, grainy but clear. Sarah Dawson, walking into the interview room. Sarah Dawson sitting, calm and focused as paper was thrown at her feet. Sarah Dawson soaking wet but dignified as laughter rang around her. Sarah Dawson piecing together her shredded resume on a glass table before leaving, her head held high. Ethan's, hand clenched into a slow, deliberate fist. Another video played, from a phone, shakier but crueler. Jason Reed tossing a mop at her, Brandon Meyer jeering loudly, Emily Wong smirking behind her hand. Michelle whispered, "They thought she was just no one." Ethan stood slowly, his jaw set, his eyes dark with a rage so cold it was terrifying. He didn't slam the tablet. He didn't shout. He simply turned to Michelle and said in a voice like steel, "Bring the entire executive interview panel to conference room A, now." Michelle moved like she was fleeing a fire. 10 minutes later, Jason, Brandon, Emily, Mark, Rachel and a few other smug faces gathered around the glass table in conference room A, whispering among themselves. Rachel whispered to Jason, "Why do... You think he called us here? Another hiring announcement?" Jason chuckled. "Maybe to congratulate us on our excellent cleaning crew management." The door opened. Ethan Dawson entered. The room froze. Everyone stood automatically. That's what you did when Ethan Dawson walked into a room. Without a word, he tapped a button on the wall. The security footage began to play, projected huge. Across the sleek glass wall, first awkward chuckles, then stiff shifting, then silence, thick, choking silence. Footage of Jason tearing up the test, Brandon throwing water, Emily rolling her eyes, Sarah soaked but composed. Sarah, standing tall as they threw humiliation after humiliation at her. When the video ended, Ethan turned toward them, very slowly. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It was deadly calm. "Would anyone here," he said, "like to explain exactly what I just watched?" No one answered. Ethan's gaze sharpened like a blade. "Let me clarify," he said. "You publicly humiliated a candidate, judged her based on her clothes, mocked her, destroyed her property, and violated every core value this company claims to stand for." Jason licked his lips nervously. "Sir, she wasn't qualified." "Qualified?" Ethan interrupted, his voice like a whip. "Qualified enough to handle herself with more grace, dignity, and strength than every single person in this room combined." Mark Scott tried to step in. "Maybe it was just miscommunication. Enough," Ethan said. The word echoed around the room like a gunshot. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "And if it matters to your small-minded egos," Ethan continued, "you didn't just throw out a candidate." He paused, his eyes burning through them. "You threw out my wife." The shockwave was instant. Rachel gasped so hard she stumbled back into her chair. Jason turned pale as paper. Brandon's mouth fell open, dumb and speechless. Emily dropped her clipboard with a loud clatter. What? Jason stammered. Your wife? Ethan nodded, his voice dropping even lower. Yes, Sarah Dawson. My wife. The woman you laughed at, the woman you treated like trash. He stepped closer, slow, measured. And let me make something very clear. If that's how you treat people when you think no one's watching, you don't belong here. Jason, Brandon, Emily, Rachel, they all started speaking at once, excuses tumbling over each other in a messy pile of cowardice. But Ethan silenced them with a raised hand. Your services, he said icily, are no longer required at NeuroCore, effective immediately. Michelle stepped forward with a folder in her hand, severance papers already prepared. Rachel's knees buckled. Jason looked like he might faint. Brandon opened his mouth to protest and closed it again at the look in Ethan's eyes. Without another word, Ethan turned and walked out, leaving them to drown in their own humiliation. In his private office, Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out over the glittering city skyline. He wasn't smiling. He was thinking about Sarah, about how, even when treated like garbage, she had walked with more dignity than any of the so-called leaders he had hired. He picked up his phone and typed a short text. Come home. You're stronger than all of them. Proud of you. The next morning, the NeuroCore building was buzzing again, but this time, not with gossip, this time, with fear. An internal memo had gone out at 6:01 a.m., sharp and clear. Several high-ranking executives had been immediately terminated for gross misconduct and violation of company ethics. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. By mid-morning, Jason Reed's empty office was being cleared by security. Brandon Meyer's belongings were packed into a single sad box. Rachel Collins had fled the building before noon, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. The empire they thought they ruled had crumbled overnight. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor, the executive suites, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Ethan Dawson stood at the head of a small conference room, dressed in a simple black suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up. Beside him, a chair. Waited, empty but ready. He looked around at his trusted leadership team, the real professionals, the ones who still understood honour, respect and courage. I want to introduce someone, Ethan said, his voice steady but warm. Someone who reminded me and this company what real strength looks like. The doors opened, and Sarah Dawson stepped in. She wore a clean, simple navy blouse and black slacks. No designer labels, no flashy accessories. Her hair was pulled back into a modest bun. Her expression was calm, composed, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. A few people in the room recognized her immediately, the soaked girl, the one they had seen being laughed at just yesterday. They sat straighter, embarrassed, but Ethan's voice cut through their discomfort. This is Sarah Dawson, he said proudly. My wife, and from today forward, the new Senior Director of Internal Development. A stunned silence. Sarah looked at the room, her chin lifted, her shoulders squared. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Smugly, she simply nodded once, a queen accepting her rightful crown. Ethan continued. She'll be helping rebuild the corporate culture we claim to stand for, with honesty, empathy and strength. Someone at the table, a senior strategist named Kevin Holt, finally broke the silence. It's an honour, Mrs. Dawson, he said sincerely. Sarah smiled, small but genuine. Thank you, she replied. And please, just call me Sarah. There was a scattered round of respectful nods around the table. The air shifted. Respect replaced pity. Admiration replaced mockery. The girl they had once laughed at now held the future of the company in her hands. Later that afternoon, Sarah stood by the massive window of her new office, a corner space with a view stretching across the city skyline. She clutched a small, worn leather notebook in her hand, the same one she had used to scribble dreams, job applications, and survival lists during all those hard months. Now she opened it, she turned to a blank page, and she wrote in firm, steady letters, "You are not where you started. You are not what they said. You are stronger because you endured." Behind her, the office door creaked slightly. Ethan leaned in, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you could use this," he said. Sarah turned, accepting the cup with a small smile. "Thanks," she said. Then teasing lightly, "Did you bring a mop too, just in case?" Ethan laughed, low and genuine. "I figured you don't need one anymore. Now you just wipe floors with careers." Sarah chuckled softly, sipping her coffee, the warm afternoon sun wrapping around her like a promise. It wasn't just a new job, it was a new beginning. A beginning she had built not with wealth or privilege, but with dignity, strength, and an unbreakable heart. Days later, the Neurocore headquarters looked different, not from the outside, but from the inside, where it mattered most. The atmosphere had shifted. There was less polished arrogance, less shallow perfection. There was more caution now, more respect. Everyone had heard the story, about the girl they laughed at, about the CEO's wife, about how dignity had quietly walked in where cruelty once ruled. In her new office, Sarah Dawson sat at her desk, the late afternoon sun casting a soft golden glow over the glass walls. Stacks of projects awaited her review, internal team mentorship, programs, revised hiring protocols to eliminate biases, community outreach initiatives that actually mattered. But Sarah wasn't overwhelmed, she was focused. Calm. A soft knock came at the door. Michelle, the CEO's senior assistant, peeked in, holding a thick envelope. "These are the latest applicants for the Leadership Fellowship," Michelle said, handing it over. Sarah took it carefully, nodding. "Thank you." Michelle hesitated before speaking again, her voice softer this time. "For what it's worth, you're exactly what this company needed." Sarah smiled, not the polished kind taught in etiquette classes, but a real one, from deep within. "Maybe we all just needed a reminder," she said. Michelle smiled back and left. As Sarah flipped through the folder, reading names, resumes, cover, letters, she remembered what it felt like. To sit there, to hope, to be judged without being truly seen. She picked up a pen and made her first note in the margin. See the person, not just the paper. Later that evening, long after the offices had emptied and the city outside had softened into twilight, Sarah found herself alone in the building's small rooftop garden. It was quiet up here, above the noise, the gossip, the old scars. Ethan found her standing at the edge, the wind teasing loose strands of her hair. He walked up beside her silently. Together, they stared out at the city, so vast, so glittering, so full of challenges still waiting. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked quietly. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I've been ready my whole life. I just had to survive long enough to get here." Ethan smiled and slid his hand into hers. "Whatever comes next, you won't be facing it alone." Sarah squeezed his hand, lightly. "I never needed to be rescued," she said. "Just needed a fair fight. And now," Ethan said, smiling with fierce pride, "you've got one." They stood together, watching the city pulse with light and promise, 2 warriors arm in arm, one who had fought her way from the bottom, the other wise enough to recognize what real strength looked like. In the quiet of the night, beneath the endless sky, a new story began, one written not in shame, not in survival, but in triumph. Weeks passed. Under Sarah Dawson's quiet leadership, something remarkable began to happen inside Neurocore Corporation. The poisonous arrogance that had once infected the executive floors started to fade. In its place, a new kind of energy grew, rooted in respect, resilience, and genuine talent. Sarah didn't wave banners or make speeches. She worked, she listened, she built. Her first major act as senior director was launching the NeuroCore People First initiative, a complete reform of the hiring and training process. No more superficial judgments based on appearances, no more executive panels designed to intimidate, no more hidden cruelty hiding behind polished smiles. The focus shifted towards skill, character, and resilience, values that couldn't be faked on a resume. Sarah personally oversaw the first few batches of interviews. She shook hands with candidates who wore cheap suits but carried real fire in their eyes. She welcomed those who didn't have fancy degrees, but had climbed mountains most executives couldn't even imagine. She saw herself in every one of them, and she fought for them like she once wished someone had fought for her. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, Kevin Holt, one of the older, respected department heads, stood and said what many had been thinking. "I've been here 15 years, he said, looking around the room. "But it's only now, under this leadership, that I actually believe in this place." There was a murmur of agreement. Even the walls of the gleaming skyscraper seemed to breathe differently now, lighter, freer. Sarah smiled, a real proud smile, but she didn't linger on the applause. She turned the focus back to the work, as always, because Sarah knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. It was about building something that would outlast the pettiness and cruelty of the past. Late one evening, as she organised files in her office, Ethan Dawson stepped inside, tie loosened, his usually sharp posture relaxed. For once. "You're still here," he said, smiling. "You know me," Sarah replied, stacking papers neatly. "Hard to walk away when there's work to finish." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching her quietly. "You've changed this place more in a month," he said softly, "than some people tried in years." Sarah shrugged modestly. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Ethan said, walking closer. "But you reminded everyone what real strength looks like." Sarah set down the last file, turning toward him fully. "And you," she said, teasing lightly, "finally learned not to judge people by their clothes." Ethan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Hard way, best way?" He reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city glowing outside the glass walls, a living testament to dreams that refused to die. Finally, Ethan asked, "So, what's next, Mrs. Dawson?" Sarah smiled, wide, fearless, brilliant, everything. In that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just Sarah's redemption story. This was the beginning of a legacy, built not by privilege, not by power plays, but by relentless courage, heart, and truth. And this time, she would not just survive the world. She would reshape it, one choice at a time, one soul at a time, one future at a time. Months later, NeuroCore wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Productivity had skyrocketed. Employee turnover dropped to the lowest rate in company history. More importantly, people no longer whispered in corners. They collaborated, they innovated, they believed. Sarah Dawson's influence was everywhere, visible not in banners or flashy campaigns, but in the quiet confidence people carried into their work. The ones who had once been overlooked, the ones with second-hand clothes, imperfect resumes, and messy dreams, now had a place where they belonged. At the annual NeuroCore Vision Summit, the main conference hall overflowed with employees, partners, and media. The buzz was electric. Everyone knew today would be different. No over-polished speeches, no hollow promises. Real stories, real vision. At the centre of it all stood Sarah, now officially announced as Chief Innovation Officer, a title she wore like armour forged from every wound she'd survived. Ethan Dawson stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching, her with quiet pride. Sarah stepped up to the podium. There was no nervousness in her step, no apology in her voice. Just truth. She began simply. "I wasn't born with the right clothes, the right connections, or the right degrees. But I was born with something better. A refusal to give up when people told me I didn't belong. This is I. Room was utterly silent. Today, Neurocore isn't about appearances, she continued. It's about resilience, about courage, about finding value where others see none. Because real potential doesn't always walk in wearing Prada and carrying a golden resume. Sometimes it walks in soaked in rain, with a crumpled dream in hand and a heart that refuses to quit. A pause. Soft, stunned breathing filled the air. And if anyone doubts, Sarah said, her voice rising just a touch, they only need to look around this room. She gestured to the hundreds of employees, former interns, ex-cleaners, single parents, immigrants, dreamers, now thriving because someone finally saw them for who they truly were. We are Neurocore. We rise together. The applause started, small, polite, respectful. Then it grew, it thundered, a standing ovation. Ethan smiled, not the polished corporate smile, but the kind of smile that said, she didn't just survive. She rebuilt the world. After the summit, on the rooftop where it had all once started, Sarah and Ethan stood again, this time not in quiet reflection, but in celebration. The city stretched out beneath them. Endless. Alive. Waiting. You changed. Everything. Ethan said quietly, slipping his hand into hers. Sarah smiled. Strong, steady, infinite. No, she whispered, eyes on the horizon. We changed everything. And this time there was no fear left in her heart. Only purpose. Only fire. Only the unstoppable, undeniable truth. She had become the storm they never saw coming. Several months later, standing by the massive glass window of her office, Sarah Dawson watched the sunrise break over the city. The skyline shimmered gold, casting long shadows across the Neurocore Tower, a monument not to power, but now, finally, to resilience. Behind her, the new company culture was alive. Young interns confidently presenting ideas, former underdogs now leading teams, voices once silenced now shaping decisions. It wasn't perfect, nothing real ever was, but it was alive. It was growing. It was hers. Sarah tucked a simple silver pen into her leather notebook, the same notebook that had once carried 1,000 desperate hopes. She flipped open to the first page, the place where she had once scribbled in shaky handwriting. You are not what they think of you. You are what you fight to become. She smiled. She wasn't that scared girl anymore, shivering outside glass doors, hoping to be seen. She had become the one holding the doors wide open for others. There was a soft knock. Ethan Dawson entered, 2 coffees in hand, their morning ritual. No emergencies yet, he said with a playful smirk, almost suspiciously peaceful. Sarah laughed quietly. Give it 5 minutes. He handed her the coffee and leaned casually against her desk, his eyes warm, proud. You've built something bigger than a company, Ethan said. You've built a belief. Sarah looked around her office, at the files, the future plans, the framed photo of her first day at Neurocore, wet and shivering, but standing tall. It wasn't just me, she said softly. Ethan tilted his head. Maybe not, but it started with you. Outside, a new group of interns entered the lobby. Fresh faces, nervous smiles, big dreams. Sarah watched them with a kind of fierce tenderness. One young woman, hair frizzy from the rain, clothes a little wrinkled, hesitated by the security. Desk? Sarah saw herself years ago standing right there. Without a second thought, she grabbed her coat, left her coffee half full and headed for the elevators. Where are you going? Ethan called after her, smiling. To open the door, Sarah replied, stepping into the elevator, and as the doors slid shut, her reflection caught for just a moment, no longer uncertain, no longer small, but a leader, a fighter, a force. Downstairs, Sarah approached the young woman. She smiled warmly, kindly, the way no one had smiled at her once upon a time. First day? She asked gently. The girl nodded, overwhelmed. Sarah extended her hand. Welcome to Neurocore. Let's build something incredible. Together. In that simple act, a new cycle began. A cycle not of cruelty and judgment, but of courage, empathy, and unstoppable strength. The fire that had once been a flicker inside, Sarah Dawson now burned bright enough to light the path for others. And she wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because the world didn't need more perfect faces at the top. It needed more warriors who had walked through the storm, and had come, back carrying light,